Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of an all-new series, BOOGAWHO, from LP Alliance. We are LP Alliance, an intercaucus coalition rebuilding the Libertarian Party and revolutionizing the liberty movement. My name is Amanda Griffiths, and joining me is Phil Ryan, and we are joined together by Tim Teagan, who is the current chairman of the Libertarian Party of Michigan and a member of the Boogaloo movement. So, Tim, thanks so much for being here on our inaugural episode.
No problem. It's my pleasure.
Wonderful. This was all really kind of Phil's brainchild, so I want to kick this over to him pretty quickly. But to give us like a brief intro, essentially, of who you are and what you're up to now.
All right. Like you said, I'm currently the now acting chairman of the Libertarian Party of Michigan as of fairly recently. I was first vice chairman, and our chairman recently resigned. That being said, also probably one of the first chairmen who's actively on federal parole from federal incarceration from my time in the Boogaloo movement. I was arrested by the Counterterrorism Task Force of the FBI, partnered with Department of Homeland Security, ATF, and even a couple agents of the CIA. The only crime that they were able to put on me was being a marijuana user who owns firearms in a state where marijuana is legal. They were really thinking they could get me on all types of conspiracy charges, terrorist charges, but I mean, in the Boogaloo group, most of us, we knew the law. We walked right up to the end of it, or as far as we could go. And most of us never really crossed that line unless we absolutely had to.
Well, I will say that is a kind of a stark difference from many Libertarian Party chairs who are acting like they can't say anything for fear of being on a list. So I think you should be proud of the list you're on because it means that the government has persecuted you. But, you know, it's nothing that you have committed would have been a violation under any sort of libertarian philosophy. And so I know that there's been kind of some pushback in the libertarian movement of you being in this kind of chair role because of it or something like that. And they have this negative perception associated with it. And I find that very hypocritical for kind of what we speak as principles. And so, yeah, Amanda was right. This is a bit of kind of a brainchild that I had that I feel like the Boogaloo movement was malaligned by the media. And the Libertarian Party kind of fell into the trap of ignoring it. And so we're hoping that we can shed light onto some of the history in the past that happened from people's personal experience and challenge directly the media perception about the Libertarian Boogaloo movement, which is, as people might not know, it is a libertarian militia movement. The idea that you must actually have active members in defense of liberty, otherwise it will go away, and that it must be seen in public and shown, even though the movement majority, the ideology was spread through meme culture, which I find quite interesting by itself. So this is a big switch for you to go from sort of an activist or agitator in the name of liberty role to being inside of the party. What do you feel is kind of the difference of it? What are some things maybe frustrate you with that, or things that you want to see happen through the party?
Yeah, I won't lie, it's quite a bit of a change up. I'd be lying if I told you I wouldn't rather be in the streets, wouldn't rather be out there with my good old AR-15s, preaching the good word of freedom and standing up to what I believe is a tyrannical government, no matter if it's a red or blue sitting in office. But it's a way I can still fight for our cause in a good position. Right now, as Michigan stands, there's been infighting for years, as well as through most of the party, from what I can tell. Big divide between the Mises, the anti-Mises,
Yeah.
and it is reminiscent of my times back in the Boogaloo, because I mean, we started off strong, you know. I joined in spring of 2019 before we got really, really big. And it was a good headlong movement. And then eventually infighting, federal infiltration, it made us divide, break away, and turn in on each other. The same way I'm kind of seeing our party currently is. If there's one thing I can do as chairman, I'm hoping to at least bring down the amount of infighting and hopefully repair some of the damage that's been done in the previous chair.
So, as somebody who was not involved in the Boogaloo movement at all, but kind of shared some of the same ideology that you can only defend liberty by, having the arms to do so, that what was the major cause, you think, in the division there versus the party? I know that there is the question of federal infiltrators kind of making people nihilistic or more likely to go out and do things kind of against libertarian ethics. But besides that, do you think from what I've heard, there was a large split that happened between kind of maybe a far right reactionary versus a group that really wanted to remain just, let's be libertarian, let's defend everybody. Um, and from what I've heard, the majority of Boogs were actually the ones that were wanting to stay libertarian, but a bunch of media attention got put onto these kind of reactionary groups. Is that accurate?
Somewhat. I mean, we would occasionally get somebody who, for example, had racist leanings or homophobic leanings, but I mean, in all honesty, it was quite rare.
Yeah,
Straight from the beginning, our pamphlet said, we stand for freedom of all people. We stand against racism. We stand against uh, pedophilia. We stand against communism, socialism. We stand against tyrannical forms of government for all people.
yeah,
And a lot of the infighting, too, had to do with what people were prioritizing our resources on, if you could say. You know, for example, I've done 180 armed events across the country. Um, Most of them were the anti-lockdown protests, many Second Amendment protests. I was out there with Spike Cohen a couple of times, came armed to those events for his safety. At the same time, I was at Black Lives Matter. I was at Pride marches. You know, a lot of the division came down to some people didn't know where best to put our resources, whether we were just going to be these people coming out to defend protesters, whether we needed to take harder stands on against government tyranny in of itself. It's essentially most all of us had the same end goal in mind, which is be there to fight for freedom in the event of a worst case scenario. Um, but many of us had different avenues to get there.
I see.
Can
So,
you say a little bit about how you got started with the Boogaloo movement? Because it's very decentralized. I imagine everyone's story of getting to know about it and coming to it is different. So what attracted you to it and what actually brought you into it? What were your intentions?
Well, like I said, I got started earlier in most, spring of 2019. We didn't really blow up big until spring of 2020. Um, and the first thing I saw was a meme. It was a meme of Washington crossing the Delaware in Hawaiian shirts, plate carriers, nods. Uh, and I forgot the exact wording, but it all had to do with fighting tyrants in the name of freedom. Before this, I mean, I was big into the anonymous group. I was a big follower of theirs. I loved their message. Even went to a few of the Million Mask marches. Even went down to DC when I was only 17. And but I couldn't find a group that matched nearly all of my callings. You know, I wanted to put freedom and personal liberty above anything else. Not be a nationalist, not be like a Christian only kind of militia. I mean, because in Michigan we have a lot of militias, and I have bumped shoulders with them a little bit before I got into the Boogaloo, and probably just because I ran into a couple of bad ones or a little more ones I left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth that I didn't think that was the avenue for me. Um, that being said, after I got big into the Boogaloo, I met most of our militias. I'd say at least 80 to 90% of Michigan militias are there for similar reasons. They're maybe a little bit more Christian leaning, a little bit more nationalist leaning. Most of them are pretty good people, though. There's even quite a few ones that are predominantly libertarian. Like I still got good connections with Southeast Michigan Volunteer Militia. Michigan Home Guard was a pretty good one, and but nothing called me home like the way the Boogaloo did. You know, They didn't care if you wanted to smoke weed or get high, get drunk. If you wanted to make certain life decisions that certain people might not agree with, but still believed you had the personal freedom and the autonomy to do so. And it was probably the only militia group I could ever found where I could truly be myself and be welcomed and respected.
I mean, that's that is a classic separation, I think, from groups that are going to be based on the principles of libertarian philosophy in general, right? And so it's kind of the upsetting part, I think, with the division in the party is that people can't let go of people living different lives or coming together in solidarity around very similar goals. They have to focus in on these very small things and then be abusive about those small things. And it's been a real shame. And it really comes down, I think, mostly to a human nature of needing to control things. I think that's kind of what it all is. And so it sounds like you're saying kind of this was a militia movement that did not do that. And that may have been kind of the kind of genesis of you saying, I want to get involved in here. And we brought up the memes. Was it literally just the memes that you saw it and you were like, actually, then you saw more and you're like, whoa, these people are speaking to me? Is that what it was?
Yes, 100%. Even when I was arrested by the FBI and they first put me in the back of the cruiser, the FBI agents looked at me and they said, Mr. Teagan, we got to know, how did you get involved with all this? And I looked at him, smiled, and said it all started with a meme. And it really is the hard and truth that meme led to more. Then you're in groups and pages. And I will say it's probably a cultural thing with my generation. You know, we can see visual imagery with quick words and repetitions that convey a large message in a quick second. You know, we don't need to listen to hour-long speeches or anything to get a quick message across.
You hear that, Amanda? Do you hear that, Amanda?
He said we didn't need to. He didn't say we're not allowed to. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Amanda is a woman of many words, but I kid. But it's interesting because from what I've seen is that it also then built out this kind of own subculture in this movement that kind of took no shit, that was trying to guard from these kind of outside influences, and from what I could tell, it did that pretty well. But I think the real problem is when infiltration happened, and then when every media platform really started kind of bearing down on you guys. Does that seem fair that those kind of a 1-2 punch of federal infiltration and that kind of became a problem?
I mean, it's by far the infiltration was much larger than the media ever was. The media problem was how other people viewed us, not how we viewed ourselves. And I mean, me personally, I'd always smile every time I'd read a CNN or a Fox News article about me, because Fox would call me a commie sympathizer, while CNN would call me a white supremacist. And I'm over here like, a quarter of our people were different people of colors. We had people that were transgendered in our movement. We had Christians, atheists, Muslims. Like, we were a wide encompassing movement, and all of us knew that, and we welcomed each other.
Yeah.
That being said, because of those news articles, that would make it hard to interact with some of these groups. There was a group time when I was out in Columbus, Ohio, and we were going to do security for a Pride March. At the same time, there was a anti-COVID lockdown march. So there was a mixture of Antifa and Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, militias, and all these other activists that were butting heads, and we're trying to stand in the middle of them. I mean, I even got sucker punched in the back of the head by an Antifa guy who thought I was racist. And at the end of the day, he shook my hand and told me he's sorry.
Mhm.
So they have to see us to understand us. And unfortunately, when their first acknowledgement of us is either from a media platform or from the telephone chain of he said, she said, it's going to leave a bad taste in almost everyone's mouth. And that was a tactical move on our government and media's part, because we were one of the few groups that really was trying to bridge the gap. And that was something our government was more terrified of than even our guns.
It seems like one of the difficult things about being extremely decentralized is the difficulty in forming a cohesive movement narrative to counteract what the powers that be are saying about you. Did you have any attempts to address that? Did you find that very challenging?
I mean, it was hard to get our actual message out there, and we did try working with these news agencies. We even had CNN follow us around here in Michigan for a 60 and 6 segment. and they butchered most of it. They took 90% of all the good material and kept the 10% bad to try and spin us in a way that wasn't true. We did have certain journalists like Ford Fisher from News to Share who gave us honest reviews, would follow us around. We one of the most honest interviews we had were the foreign interviews. RTV from Russia. We had Sky News and one from Sweden that I had to translate their news interview, but I mean those were some of the most honest ones about us. In all honesty, we couldn't get American media to actually publish about what we were or what we were doing. They wanted to continue with their fear mongering campaign because it made people afraid and got views.
So I do have to ask, I think broadly speaking, libertarians are very skeptical of media apparatus, especially ones that are tied in with the government. When I found out that the Libertarian Party did not come to your aid, maybe I should tell you where I was never involved in the party until about a year ago, when I saw some behavior out of it that I found unacceptable and needed to get involved with. And prior to that, I kind of just ignored it. But I've been learning about it and going, wait a minute, we didn't say anything. Like the party didn't come out in support. It didn't rally the troops. It just left people out to dry, and that there was no fighting for it. I find it kind of hard to imagine that they let kind of a media bias against a group kind of keep their fear from coming out in support. And I'm only still seeing it kind of replicated in parties when I try to kind of push a more revolutionary message into the party's chats, that it's like I get called a fed, get ignored, whatever. And it's like, wait a minute, like we're supposed to be fighting for freedom here, and a lot of not freedom is going on. And if we're not the ones out there making a loud message about it because we're fearful of kind of a backlash, then that's exactly what the government wants. It wants people to be afraid. And if the Libertarian Party is going to survive, it must move out of that fear, in my opinion. So I was very kind of looking back at all of the history of it and going, this was wrong that this happened. And I was very much happy to start seeing more of the Boogs getting involved in direct positions in the party. Do you foresee that being kind of an impetus of more old school Boogs getting active in the party again?
It's possible, but I will say the party and the way the early 2020s went, it left a bad taste in a lot of our mouths. Many of them just gave up hope that there was going to be any real change unless the worst happens in our country. And many of them backed out. Many because of the fighting in the party between, like I said, the Mises and the anti-Mises. Many because we didn't have the support we were expecting. Many just got tired of the infiltration, the infighting, and it's hard to say. There are definitely individuals of us out there, specifically the most prominent, the most active of us, that are still going to do whatever we can to help the cause. And now those ways may be different. They may join a new group, a different militia, a different type of activism. They may get directly involved with the Libertarian Party, with like myself. I do know we do have members out there that are still in this party, and it's because we truly believed in the message. I didn't even know about what the Libertarian Party really stood for until 2020 when I was already with the Boogaloo. The Boogaloo is how I found this party and realized every one of my principles and beliefs line up with this political party. I didn't even know there was a party out here that believed this. And, I've been with you guys ever since. Now, we had a convention that was at the Soaring Eagle Casino in Michigan, 2020, and we showed up maybe 25 boogs deep, sat in the back row, participated. We weren't delegates, we were just sitting in as guests and wanted to view the meetings. And there was a large amount of Michigan that, welcomed us, respected us. But like you said, there was also a very large amount that were more scared about the publicity of having our group affiliated with the Libertarian Party, even though our principles are the same. That being said, I still believe the Libertarian Party politically is the best outlet to promote the type of change this country needs. I'm not giving up on it, obviously. I even told the judge in the courtroom, I'm going to give my full energy and support to the Libertarian Party when I'm released. And here I am now sitting chairman of a state party just 2 years after my release.
Were you going to say something, Amanda? I'm sorry.
No, I was wondering whether, because you talked about going to provide security, did you see your role as primarily going to these various protests and just being that security essentially for the activists? How did you understand your role and the movement's role more broadly?
Well, it ended up being that way predominantly with most of the protests we went there. At first, it was just about doing our part like everyone else is, especially with the lockdown protests. Um, every large myriad of different groups and people who were patriotic and didn't like the tyrannical lockdowns that were happening took a stand. And our beliefs were completely aligned, so we were standing shoulder to shoulder. And it mostly had to do with the fact that every member of the Boogaloo joined the Boogaloo because we are in fear that our country is heading toward a civil conflict. That could be a civil war, that could be a revolution, it could be just complete social collapse. It's hard to say. But we wanted to be the frontliners in the event of that worst case scenario to not only try and save as many lives as we can, but to make sure that that light of freedom doesn't fade away. If it was up to a civil war between a Republican and a Democrat, no matter who wins, we all lose. So somebody has to fight for freedom.
It's a good point, and I think I've heard you say it a few times, being very, very stern about the fact that it is not right or left. And I think that is a message that the Libertarian Party needs to embrace now more than ever, as it's going through somewhat of an identity crisis. And I'm hopeful that can kind of bear out, and some of the things that LPA wants done will do that. Our basic motto is the idea of libertarian solidarity, that even if you believe in these small differences, that you don't let that stop the march that we're trying to get to, that the end game is basically identical. You might get off slightly earlier as a minarchist than an anarchist, but we should be still fighting for freedom. And I have a hard time looking around, seeing kind of the way the world is going and going, how are people still stuck on their egos? How is that a thing that's happening? So it is good to hear that was such a strong root back then, and hopefully it can be brought back now. So we do have a video of some clips, and I think we should go through them. The point is to watch a small clip, then I put a meme in as a placeholder for each time, so that way we stop at a meme, then we can talk, then we can move on. So let's go over there.
So what's with the Hawaiian shirts? Speaking of your kit.
We needed something to identify ourselves with.
I know you're not trying to seem menacing with the Hawaiian shirts and the igloo patches, but, an AR-style rifle, for many people, is menacing.
People can feel how they want, but the Constitution protects our rights to do that. Everybody who does such in my group is trained and efficient with their weapons.
But Shifty and his fellow Boogaloos are not part of Black Lives Matter. They're part of a very different and much more secretive movement. They say they're anti-government, anti-establishment, pro-gun, pro-freedom. But their ideology is based on a notion of an impending Second American Civil War, which they call Civil War II Electric Boogaloo.
So do you think that was a fair interview from one of them? I was looking through some of them, and I said, hey, this is kind of going through some of the topics of what it was and standing kind of on business about it. What is your opinion about that video clip?
I mean, that's definitely one of the more honest ones. One thing I would say, our uniform being the Hawaiian shirt, it's one of those things that was kind of lost to time. All I know is the reason we do it has something to do with Vietnam veterans to some degree, and the members who came back from the military and were just spat on. But exactly the nuances of it, most all Boogs kind of lost the references. It was something from the very early days.
So it kind of took a life of its own eventually, basically.
Yeah, and by the time all of us really got in the movement, it was just already there. And I mean, we love the uniform. We love the Hawaiian. It's like he said, it's not that menacing. Like you look at other groups, they're either black blocked or just military fatigues. There's something at least a little bit more approachable about floral shirts with flowers on them and pineapples.
Yeah.
The reporter mentions the Second Civil War, and I think the way that it was presented in a lot of instances was that the Boogaloo was just trying to start this Second Civil War. That seems not to be accurate based on what you've said.
For the most part, I mean, there was a divide in our movement to a degree where some members were what you would call accelerationists. They said their belief was this is going to happen anyway. Let it happen on our terms so our kids don't have to see it. In retrospect, more than likely, most of that attitude was probably coming from federal infiltrators. Some of them are already been confirmed years down the line. But I mean, to a degree, it had a valid argument behind it. We came close to civil conflict on multiple occasions in 2020 through 2022. I was there in Michigan Capitol when we stormed the Capitol building. I was the second guy in the building. It was my fire team that led the way. We read the law saying we could legally enter the Capitol building with our firearms. We waited in line, got our temperatures checked because of COVID, and they let us in. I will say the tensions got extremely high. There was 280 armed individuals in that Capitol building, less than 25 armed guards of state police, and a small 5-man SWAT team up on the 3rd floor. If one man just negligent discharge, I mean, it would have been the same thing with Lexington Green. No one still knows who fired that first shot, but it would have set in series of events that no one would have been able to stop. And there was multiple events that came just as close to igniting that powder keg our country was sitting at. Looking back, I think there's very few people who can debate that there was a high likelihood or a high chance of our country developing into civil conflict. And I thank God it didn't. But there is still a large amount of people who thinks that we can't vote our way out of this. That if we ever want to have actual freedom, we might have to fight for it. And civil war is still table talk discussion in many households. I mean, they even had a movie about it out of Hollywood named Civil War.
Yeah.
And they even had references to me. I could actually name each one of those guys in Hawaiian shirts who they're based off of.
Huh.
And so that for anyone to say that there is never a chance and it will never happen is honestly just willfully ignorant at that point.
Well, I think especially now, I think people are even more aware of the possibility. I think for the first time ever, you have people kind of in the Democratic Party going, whoa, like what's happening here is much more like an imperial president, the way they're kind of trying to build out this massive police state. The AI systems are getting more and more aggressive when it comes to categorizing people. And I think people are starting to go, what is going on here, right? And hopefully that never becomes necessary. But, there is a reason for the Second Amendment, and it is for the fact if you squeeze too hard against the rights of the people, we are not like other countries. We were born out of rebellion. I don't think that will go away. But it is, I think that can bring us kind of to some of our next clips, because I think it'll bring up some questions about what happens now, right? Like what's going on when it comes to the current state of affairs in America. This will go for like a couple seconds.
That some of those tactics also violated Department of Homeland Security policy. In an interview with CBS News, Bovino denied that his agents' actions were excessive. CBS News Homeland Security correspondent Nicole Skanga has the story.
For months, masked federal agents have aggressively engaged with protesters in several states while carrying out the president's immigration directives. Shooting pepper balls into faces, using cars to move people, and even employing chokeholds on protesters, tactics endorsed by President Trump.
Americans have been watching videos of ICE tackling a young mother, tear gas being used in a Chicago residential neighborhood, and the smashing of car windows. Have some of these raids gone too far?
No, I think they haven't gone far enough because we.
So, I think these images wake people up. I remember seeing a Spike Cohen advertisement during kind of the 2020 era with kind of the abuse of the protesters. Then I think now we are seeing it both in abuse of protesters, but also in mostly peaceful immigrants. I think most people are okay with violent criminals being handled by police or whatever to make society function better. But clearly, they had a pregnant woman that they dragged through the snow and they lost a baby. Increasingly, the violence is becoming impossible to ignore. And so I think the question of civil unrest is becoming more and more likely. How do you feel about some of the imagery that you've seen there?
I mean, I saw very, very similar firsthand. I was at the Black Lives Matters protest in Detroit at the end of May of 2020, and I was going in as an individual as part of my group, but I had no backup. I had no other men with me. I wanted to be out there with Black Lives Matter of Detroit, and first 12 hours of the day was a peaceful march. It was pretty good. No one was hurt. There was no real big distress. At the end of the night, though, they employed tear gas, rubber rounds, and it got very bad very fast. There was a time where, I mean, it was hard for me too, because I'm stopping protesters from breaking into buildings. I stopped multiple break-ins and lootings that night. At the same time, I would stand out in the middle of the no man's land in between the protesters and the police with my hands up, telling the police, this is your city, your people, don't do this. But most of what I saw for the escalation of force in Detroit was from the police. And it's no different nowadays with how they handle protesters. The doctrine hasn't changed because this was in their training regiment for decades. This is how they handle protests. They smash them with an iron fist. That's how most departments train their police officers to handle it. It's definitely a problem with their training regiment more than anything. But it gets to a very difficult point that you would expect, no matter who they are, them to have a little bit more humanity than what you see. I was standing, and I had a gas mask on with my kit, but there was a time I'm standing in line. I got a 14-year-old girl to the left of me, her mother down the line, and a cop just went by and used one of them big cans of mace on us. Looked that little girl in the eye and sprayed her in the face. Looked back at me with the gas mask on, emptied the rest of the can in my face, but it didn't really do much. And there was a very large lack of humanity, and there was fear. Fear is one of the most deciding factors on how brutal people can be. That same night, May 28th, there was an active shooting at that protest in Detroit. And I wasn't too far away from it. Within 12 seconds, I ran into the gunfire. The shooter already fled, and there was a young man took a gunshot wound through his chest, bled out right on my feet. At that point in time, I was still early. I didn't get my medical training yet. I didn't know how to save him. But the police riot line wasn't even 50 yards away. Took them about 9-10 minutes to actually get police and medics to the kid. And by then he was gone. They could have saved their life had they been more competent, had they been trained better, had they been willing just to help an individual who just was shot. I mean, I already made sure the situation was clear. Got runners to the police, telling them the shooter is vacated, and they still waited so long that the kid died. Like I said, a large problem is the police training, and it puts too much emphasis on their own safety to the point where they will stomp out the smallest of possible theoretical threats because it happened one time 12 years ago, that now they have to treat every situation like that's 100% going to happen. Because one person made one bad call, now they have to treat every innocent person like they're that bad person. And it's something that would take decades to correct.
it's collectivism in action, right? They are collectivizing an entire people, and they care about their collective, right? The idea of the thin blue line, that's their collective, and you're not in it, and they will do anything to protect that collective against you, the individual, whether you're in a voluntary collective or not. So yes, that it sounds horrible, and it seems like we are seeing it, continue to happen both at the state level with certain states that are going along with the kind of enforcement policy, but also the national. Now we are seeing, the feds getting involved in ways that we have not seen in the past, in my lifetime at least.
The Libertarian Party is also still, actually I've seen the most vocal action coming from state affiliates. The Libertarian Party nationally has been pretty silent about the brutality today. Sometimes there's a little bit of hand waving, that there are kind of verbal gestures. And it feels like a lot of repetition of the inaction that took place on the national level when it came to BLM, COVID, all of this. What would you like to see from the Libertarian Party on the abuses that are currently revving up, quite frankly?
I mean, hands down, we cannot sanction the use of military personnel in our cities. I mean, we are not at that level of a terror threat. That is one of the surefire ways to ramp us up into a high probability of there being an actual skirmish in our streets, where we'll find military-grade federal combatants at this point, combined with small arms fire from a civilian populace. And that could be from a gang member or an affiliated criminal organization. It could come from individuals who are just armed, scared, and at the wrong place, wrong time. Whenever we have to subject our civil populace to law enforcement and justice, it has to be handled with a level of nuance. And that seems to have gone right out the window, and we have to condemn those actions. I can understand that many of our inner cities are falling to very violent crime, have been for a long time, and there's a lot of factors that play into it. It's not just that these people in the city are just terrible people. I mean, many of them have been backed up into a corner for decades. They don't have a lot of hope to get out of their economic constraints. They're overtaxed to the point where many of them have to either engage in criminal activities or starve. I mean, simple fact. And since that level of desperation has been bred so long, it's not going to go away overnight. And as far as the illegal immigration, if our government and its people do wish to go about deporting these individuals, it has to be handled with a gentle hand, not an iron fist. It's just going to bring more problems, more violence, more chaos to our streets if they can't find a way to do this while respecting those individuals to the point that they are still human and they're not just a violent criminal that needs to be thrown away.
It's also legitimizing federal violations of the Constitution is kind of the way they're currently operating. A couple presidents ago, they passed kind of the rules that allows the 100 miles around the border to be quote unquote Constitution free. And this is the first administration where we are seeing wide scale usage of that technicality, which we know they do not have a right to violate that, but they are acting as if they have impunity in doing so. All right, so let's move on to the next video clip here.
What doesn't make people feel safe? A tank next to Chipotle. It's stupid, and it's for the cameras, and you can get into the legal aspect of posse comitatus, but it's foundational. So I keep saying, Jen, where are the don't tread on me people? We were told for years that we needed to be prepared about an overbearing federal government that would step in over local control and actually put troops on the streets. I mean, where are those people? And I would just ask them to rise up. And this isn't the way things should be done. And again,
I can't believe I'm agreeing with Tim Walz on something like rise up. Yes, yeah. So last. I mean, wow, yeah.
And most certainly, he's right. This is not something that should just be taken sitting down. You
Mhm.
know, this is an overreach of government. Whether you agree with why they're doing it or not, it's not about if you win, it's how you win, for example. You know, many people can understand we might have an immigration problem. Many people in our country might vote to have these people deported. But if you're going to do it with a strong arm of the military force invading our neighborhoods, it's subjecting us to a level of martial law almost that we were never signing up for. That isn't justified. It'd be one thing if we had active firefights in our cities, making it look like Fallujah. Then okay, yeah, I can see why the military may need to step in, but we are not anywhere near that. And it is a show of force. It's to say, look what we can do to you. If you ever step out of line, we can do this to you. And unfortunately, because of the way the early 2020s went, many of your don't tread on me people and groups, they came out and they were subject to federal arrest, like myself. They were subject to federal infiltration. They targeted many of the most upstanding groups and turned us into such a mess that by the time it's 5 years later, uh, most of these groups don't have the cohesiveness to be able to stand up to this.
Right. I'm seeing a comment, by the way, from Charlie Larkin, who says that from my observation, Waltz and Ilk told the don't tread on me people to take a hike, and they did. True. Glad to see he might be realizing that was a mistake, but the horse left the barn already. See, I don't think he's realizing he made a mistake. I think this is at once more sinister and also more hapless insofar as so the party didn't do anything, right? The party didn't do anything back then and left you alone. I think that now, because of that lack of support, we are seeing, unfortunately, a reluctance to get involved again, which perpetuates the narrative that it's conditional, right? It's conditional until it's about, only when it's about white people, I think is what the typical narrative would be about the Boog, which is silly. As you mentioned, you had a lot of people of color in the movement. That now, because of that inaction, because the party was afraid of looking as though they were co-signing something sinister, there is a reluctance on behalf of those who were active to get active again. So now it definitely looks like it was a sinister one-sided thing. And this is because of the party's inaction.
I mean, I can definitely agree that we did not get as much support from the LP as we were hoping. And if we just even publications saying these people aren't what the media were saying would have been a great help. Even if it didn't reach a whole lot of people, I mean, just seeing the effort would have been of great help. I mean, I'm not saying you guys needed to fund lawyers on my behalf or the behalf of the rest of us who were arrested for crimes that should never have been crimes. But when we put our lives out there, and I would like to mention, like, many of my friends got killed doing what I did. Duncan Lemp, Michael Newman, Jared Foster, just to name a few. Almost 100, if not more, of us were arrested, thrown away in cages, stripped of our natural-born rights, maybe to never even get them back. And at the end of the day, at least from my perspective, everything I did and what we did was still worth it. We came to a needed cause for freedom. We defended it when we thought our country was in its darkest hour, even if its darkest hour is yet to come. When we were needed, we answered the call, and we gave everything we had to give. I was a pizza driver, and in the about 3 years I was with the movement, I put well over $10,000 into it between gas, hotels, equipment, training, supplies for food drives, and that was just me alone, let alone how much everyone else was putting into it, and their time and their safety. The amount of times I had to look at my father and my brother, tell them I love them, I might not come home, going out to these events because I knew it was worth it. And unfortunately, we were given very little, if not any, support from anywhere. And had there been a more public support from the libertarian movement, maybe we would still see more of our people around.
Yeah, it's upsetting to hear that. And you bring up the idea of having a legal fund and things like that, and you see other movements where you have people going out there enforced for those movements, and they all have legal funds. They don't become atomized, and I think this is a bit of a problem with the way the kind of libertarian ideology in general is it pushes individualism into atomism, and then we leave those atoms out there all by themselves.
Well, it's not
and
the
that's
ideology;
all right.
it's the portrayal. But
Well,
yeah,
it's how
yeah.
it's been operated, and
Right,
particularly through the party. I think external to the party, people are much more cohesive in that. Otherwise, but in the party, it seems like, hey, you're just one person. Who cares? Let's let them out to dry. And I find that to be a problem. And I think that there needs to be an infrastructure that does support our activists and our agitators that are going out there and doing those risks to defend liberty and stop the kind of totalitarianism that we're seeing rising kind of very strongly today. Let's move on to the next portion, because I think it's the one that starts to explain maybe the reasons why Tim Walz, is maybe wrong here.
Who studies extremist and militia groups in the U.S. She says the Boogaloo Boys' mission is to incite a second civil war, and the current climate across the country is a new opportunity. Specifically, the potential armed protests the FBI is warning could happen at all 50 state capitals.
It's an anti-government, an anti-establishment protest, which is something that would also resonate with them. Given their propensity to show up armed with weapons, anytime, folks like that mobilize, it should be of concern to law enforcement.
Now Governor Tim Walz plans to activate the National Guard.
I think what you could expect to see is an appropriate presence of folks there to ensure that there's peaceful gatherings, to make sure that the intent to do damage to any of the buildings will not happen.
What we can't see are investigators searching for clues online on who might incite violence, where, and when.
Some of those are a little more difficult to find because they move to kind of corners of the internet, but there's folks that are trained to make sure that they're looking for that.
Waldner says that preparedness level could be a deterrent.
So I do think the amount of attention that this has been getting actually might discourage people from participating.
Jeff.
So it does seem like they wanted to discourage this, right? They were going out in both state and federal level, basically discouraging the people that would want to stand up towards federal and state overreach. And I think it really comes down to they were in power in that moment, and they were doing their version of tyranny, whatever it might be. And then they couldn't imagine that there's this independent group willing to stand up. And so I sometimes when I hear the Tim Walz or the other people going like, where are these people? It's like, well, you push them into the shadows. It doesn't mean that they're not still there. I don't think all the people that believed in this ideology are just, now we're giving up all of our guns and we're going, I think it's been much more of time to go quiet for a little while until we're needed. And unfortunately, I think we are in a moment where it probably is needed that people need to come and stand up, and hopefully, some media attention either through us or for if we can, if our goals for the party can happen and building out the orbit around the party, that it'll be able to strengthen these things back up together. But what is your opinion on Tim Walz now, a different Tim Walz?
Well, I mean, like most politicians, they're opportunists. They take a storyline when it fits them and rejects them when it works against them. He thought it would sound good saying, oh, well, if you guys did this for that, why aren't you doing it for me now? Even though when we were doing it for basically the same cause and reason, he threw us right to the side. As most politicians will when it comes to us as individuals, us as activists. If we don't fit their narrative in the moment, then we're of no use to them. So that means we're their political enemy. They like to view us as tools and pawns, and they don't see us as individuals or humans, let alone citizens most of the time. But I find it ironic because that, I believe, was in reference to our January 17th protest where we had them in all 50 state capitals. And we had this planned before the January 6th event at DC. And the goal for these protests was to invite Proud Boys, Antifa, Black Lives Matters, Oath Keepers, and these other groups to essentially come together and form some kind of peace treaty. That was the mission we were trying to get to, saying, okay, let's not show up to each other's protest events and beat the crap out of each other and keep us playing tactical babysitter with you guys. Let's acknowledge the fact that both of you have grievances with your government. They may be different grievances, but your enemy's not each other. It's the people in DC. And shortly before that, right after January 6th, the CIA put out a memo, not even the FBI, the CIA, saying we were planning to storm all 50 state capitals at once and take the buildings. So when we got there, I mean, I was greeted with National Guard Humvees. They brought out 50 MSP goose stepping like something out of Star Wars. And it was completely a ridiculous waste of taxpayer money and resources over people who were showing up non-violently as we always have.
Well, it's definitely more information than I had about that clip. But again, like, I think you're right that it is the idea of pawns on a chessboard for them. For a lot of them, both on the rightists and the leftists are very, very much the same. And it's a shame that the Libertarian Party has not been able to kind of stop that.
Well, it's just such an easy way to keep the state in power. If the state says that the problem is the division is anywhere other than between the people and the institutions of power. Any line that they can use to divide, your war is here, your war is here, then that keeps us from turning our sight on the actual people who are perpetuating both these narratives and these ills, these horrors.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most blatant slap in the face when you look back in 2020. I mean, you had groups like Black Lives Matter who was upset about the police injustice against minorities. You had groups like the Proud Boys who were coming out heavily at the time because of the lockdown of mostly Democratic-led states, but ended up being pretty much universal across the country. All of them, their problem was with the government, by their own words. Yet they came out in the same streets and they'd attack each other consistently and constantly. It comes down to they're more willing to attack what they can touch than stand up to the powers that be. And that's what our government consistently used most of these protesters as. You know, they guide them in a direction that will put them in opposition of the tiny people on the ground rather than themselves in DC.
Hard agree. Let's see what else we have here up next.
The problem with the Boogaloo Boys is they're not a cohesive movement. You can have Boogaloo Boys that are white supremacists and want to harm the George Floyd protesters. You can also have Boogaloo Boys, and this is actually the larger group, that are anti-police, not racist, and they are siding with the protesters.
JJ McNabb is one of the top experts on anti-government extremism in the country and recently testified in front of the House Homeland Security Committee.
So just being able to see the Hawaiian shirt, you can't really prejudge why that person's there and what they want to accomplish.
And given its lack of clear ideology, researchers are concerned that the Boogaloo movement can encompass anyone with an anti-government gripe.
So that seemed a little bit honest. It's Vice, so it's not some of the main super mainstream ones. A little bit better, but it still seems to be putting a focus on kind of what would not be the core ideology. Instead of saying this is the core ideology and other people have co-opted language from it and are trying to take it, it seems like this is kind of a constant narrative where you take a little piece of it and then you co-opt it and make it bigger. But I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And like I said, I give credence to what I said earlier. There was a very, very small few who had a little bit of racist leanings, had a little bit of homophobic leanings, but they were never your active individuals. They were never the people who were coming out boots on ground in the streets. They were lurkers that would use our Hawaiian-themed memes, and even then, it was really few, and most of them ended up being federal infiltrators and informants. Or it was also common that they were devised by other groups, like Proud Boys, Antifa, and so forth, to act in bad faith to make us look bad to their side because they didn't want to agree with us. They didn't want to work alongside us. But most of it, like I said, had very few accounts in general had anything to do with that, and virtually none of the people who were ever boots on ground. I've yet to ever meet one that was racist, homophobic, transphobic. I mean, some of the people, they might not be 100 completely like behind the pride movement as that's their hill they want to die on, but they weren't against it. They
Would you say, Tim, that there was a core ideology for the movement?
Yeah, the core ideology is all human beings deserve to be free. All human beings deserve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we may have to fight for it again if we want to keep it. I mean, that pretty much sums it up. We have, more nuances. We're extremely against pedophilia. We are extremely against human trafficking and the victimization of the innocent people that are caught up in that terrible ordeal. But our priority is the freedom and happiness of all people.
What is sorry, briefly, just an observation. The clip ends with, well, the fear is that this movement might attract anyone with an anti-government bias. I love how that's the big fear. The big fear, everyone, is that the government might meet with some upset here. It's just interesting to me that that's automatically framed as the terrible thing.
And I think now probably a lot of those same people would be like, why isn't everybody against the government? Right. Which again, cycles and oscillations. But okay, let's go here.
Boogaloo members have marched alongside Black Lives Matter protesters, although their presence hasn't always been welcomed, and they've clashed with racist groups. The Boog Boys once led a chant of white supremacy sucks, disrupting a speech at a pro-gun rally in Richmond.
Not white supremacists. We believe in liberty for all, regardless of race, gender, creed, whether you're trans. It doesn't matter. We mean liberty for all.
John, who asked that we identify him only by his first name, runs a Boogaloo-themed Instagram page called Too Savage for Statists. In addition to supporting Black Lives Matter, he was in Hong Kong in 2019 helping pro-democracy demonstrators. Dunn and John both deny that they are actively trying to accelerate domestic warfare, but rather want to be prepared to resist a tyrannical government power grab.
In reality, nobody wants a war. Nobody. We are prepared, but it is something we don't want to happen.
At the end of the day, we don't need accelerationists. This is going to happen whether people want it to or not, sadly. Mad Dog Mattis said something. If you want to screw with me, please don't. But if you do screw with me, I will kill you all. And I think that's the mentality of the movement.
So that was Reason, obviously a little bit more fair, I think, to the Boogaloo movement than a lot of these other journalists. And really, it's everything that you said. And the reason why I waited for this to kind of be at the end is to basically allow you say your part and then see how accurate some of these various pieces were. And it sounds very much like it was an accurate accounting in there based on what I've heard from you today. What do you think about the fact that this was at Reason, but then we didn't see kind of a mirrored thing coming out of the Libertarian Party, which I find kind of odd?
Well, I believe, unfortunately, it has to do with the people who encompass the active membership of the party and their distance from their actual constituents. All right, there's a big difference from the people who live a libertarian life and vote libertarian in the polls and carry libertarian ideology, and the people who show up to our conventions, become delegates, and engage on that political platform. Unfortunately, a lot of people look at our political platform as a social club. They allow personal grudges to lead their ways far more than the principles of the party. And many of the people who engage and have the free time and the access of funds to travel to be able to engage aren't the people who would ever pick up a rifle to fight for these principles. And I can understand that. I mean, many of our founding fathers, for example, they were politicians, they were lawyers, they weren't the soldiers. And there is always going to be a bit of a divide between the political sector and the people who are on the ground, the little guys. And I'm hoping, to be able to bridge some of that gap between the people who truly live and breathe these principles, are willing to fight for them, have sacrificed for them, and the people who represent us. I do not expect when you go into a libertarian convention and you see many people who are either in their elderly years, many people who are not in shape. These aren't your fighters, and that's okay. They're not meant to be. Not everyone should be. However, the idea that them supporting a group, even though they're willing to fight for them, could draw them into a conflict with this giant overreaching government we have, I can understand why they might not have the backbone to pick that fight. It does sadden me. I wish it was different. But it does have a level of a logical dictation. And if we want our party to be able to pick, hopefully, a metaphorical, if not more actual, fight with our government, you're going to need the people who are willing to in the streets to be in those positions of power, or at the very least have their voices heard in those conventions and in the committees. And like I said, I'm hoping I can be able to change that in our Michigan party, maybe even on a national level, as well as hopefully putting a stop to a lot of the infighting we have. But another thing on that video, we were never accelerationists. Very few of us would ever want this conflict to ever happen. If there are peaceful avenues, we will exhaust each and every single one given the option. And I think a Libertarian Party is a great platform to at least go down some of the political avenues we might have. Because if we end up in a civil conflict, our power grid is extremely vulnerable. We have large parts of this country that if the electricity went down, they're going to freeze to death in the north, swelter to death in the south, lack of medical supplies and insulin and medication and life-saving treatment that people rely on could disappear. You'd be looking at a country that wouldn't be recognizable just 2-3 years into that conflict, maybe even a half a year. A potential of 80 million casualties if we enter into a civil conflict.
Well, I think anybody who's had a sober thought about this will have the same opinion, right? That nobody wants that, right? Like nobody wants to see this kind of mass spread, but it feels like the media is purposely pushing people towards that, and the actions of our government is purposely pushing that. Even the base that kind of went with MAGA originally, the idea was not to keep sending our money across to other countries around the world. And now we're just, and these people are saying, well, tax strike, tax revolt. And it's almost like they're trying to egg it on, right? That they want to destroy what otherwise has been kind of the example that you can live beside somebody that's different than you and have a functioning society. It does feel like that to me, that's kind of been what the recent goal of this administration has been, or at least the way it's appearing.
I mean, it's very possible. I mean, Trump, he's definitely an interesting president that we haven't had someone quite like him in a long time. But what scares me the most is his supporters and how evangelical some of them can be. I can guarantee you there's quite a large amount of his basis that, if given the option, would make him virtually a monarch and would keep him in office, And like I also said before, if we have some sort of a civil war between the right and the left, we all lose. There isn't going to be more freedom at the end of that. There wouldn't be more liberty. We would live all less free lives than what we have now, and it's already constraining now. And it's a very big possibility that the powers up there that may be pushing for it. It might end up being a small one that they think that they can control and conquer quickly to institute some new form of government that just takes away some of the last freedoms we still have.
It's a horrifying thought, and I think you're right with the nature of some of the MAGA supporters. I know that there's somebody in Michigan that's involved in some of the caucus war stuff, that their last organization was working on how do we legitimize a third term for President Trump. Yeah, and it's sad to see that being infiltrating into the party And I think it's the onus on every libertarian to say, we clearly see the outcome of imperial presidencies. We definitely don't want a monarchy one of them, right? So I think we need to be loud about it. I think we need to build solidarity around people that we agree 99% with anyway. And the small differences, we need to talk through them in a way that's not abusive to one another, and try to push the egos behind, because I think you have a very sober understanding in a very similar way that I'm looking around at the political environment and going, holy shit, this is bad. And so it's good to hear that you're chairing a party and have that same sort of mentality.
Yeah, it's very good to see you in a leadership position. I will say that as someone who also wants to merge agitation and being in a more formal role. So it's really good to see that.
Okay, I think this is the last clip, maybe.
These are some Boogaloo boys. We're with a bunch of different groups today, but we're just trying to get everybody united here, all sides. We're not left-wing extremists, right-wing extremists. We're just Americans. We're all upset. Everybody's angry. So instead of fighting each other, we're just trying to unite everybody as Americans together. We're trying to look past the whole political stuff right now. We don't see them as the enemy. We're kind of like upset about our politicians, and they don't represent us anymore.
So that was the final clip. I feel like it kind of does encompass kind of the overarching conversation we've had today. And I'm happy that this conversation kind of went naturally along this path. I figured it would from everything that I've been reading about the movement. But it's nice to see that hasn't gone away, because I had heard that there are people that kind of fell to nihilism. They either fell to nihilism that it's impossible, or they fell to right-wing extremism. And I'm sure there are a bunch that have kind of gone that route as well, starting to ask certain questions. But to know that there are still cores of people that are holding true to that ideology from the same statements that happened years ago when the movement was alive and really, really strong. I think some of our goal with this is to rehash some of that history, bring on some key people to give their perspective, and then hopefully reignite the excitement to make it happen again, get more people involved. And then if there's a way that we can help build out the party in a way that is supportive of that. I think Amanda brought up the idea that we do want to kind of merge some of these various parts of the liberty sphere. I wrote a piece in the Torch about the idea of the three prongs of liberty, that we have the political, right? And we also have the activists, and then we have the agitators for liberty. And those are three distinct things that have been disparate, not connected, and none of the infrastructure surrounding the party has existed to let them work in cohort. So that's kind of my aim for it and the point of wanting to start this series. And if you know anybody else specifically that you think would be good on here, I have some people lined up for about, I think, like a week or 2 weeks from now. But if you have anybody else that you think would be good for me to talk to with old connections, be happy to bring them on. And I think now, I guess, give Amanda the last conversation, and then you say your final piece, and then we'll close for the night.
No, I think we covered it all. And again, I'm very happy to have had you on, and I'm hoping for certainly a revival of libertarian activism, whatever form that takes, whatever we call it. And hopefully we call it many things. Hopefully we have diverse coalitions. That needs to happen. That needs to continue now.
Yeah, and one thing I'll note, I will say it's unlikely that another activism group like the Boogaloo movement will come about with the same name, same symbol. I'm sure the principles will be there, but it'll probably come under a different shade. And that's just how these things evolve. It's how they grow. It'll probably even consist of many of the same old people, if not very similar people in their beliefs. Unfortunately, as the Boogaloo came and mostly went now, we weren't given the support we needed to thrive. Yet we still stood up and fought our best that we could. Like I said, many of us sacrificed everything. Some of us gave our lives. And in the event that a similar cause rises again, at least here in Michigan, I'll make sure that they're given any support that our party can offer them. And also, I do believe it's incumbent that as far as the Republican and the Democratic Party constituents, their actual people, we have to be willing to work alongside them and tell them, like, what we want is for your best interest too. We're not out just to prop ourselves on the pedestal. We want to help this whole country rise above and get back what is ours by right. And I'm hoping that if we can continue with that energy and help that energy grow within our party, we might be able to do some really remarkable things in the years to come.
Excellent. Okay, and with that, I think we'll close off, and you all have a great